No worries. Let me know when you're ready, Joe. Okay, good evening, everybody. It being 4 p.m., I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Utility Building Ad Hoc Advisory Citizens Committee with agenda published timely. All committee members are present except for Julie Ward, if I'm not mistaken, and we expect Julie to join. Just for quick housekeeping, Patrick, you mentioned you need to step off somewhere around 5:30. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Why don't Denise? Why don't we go forward with the agenda at this point?
Good deal. If we could have an approval to accept the minutes from our February 4th meeting. Josh, are you going to throw the agenda up for us? I'm sorry. Oh,
John usually runs it, but let me go ahead and try to get it on there for us. One moment. Okay, one moment.
If I could get an action from the team on the acceptance of February 4th meeting minutes.
Sorry, Denise, I had a technical issue. I apologize.
That's okay.
Has there been a motion and a second, Denise? I'm sorry.
There's been no motion.
I accept.
All right, Jennifer is moved. Can we get a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Second by Mr. O'Day. Any discussion on the minutes? If you've had a chance to review, are there any suggested changes or additions to the minutes as published? All right, not hearing any from the committee, let's call the vote. All in favor of approving the minutes of the February 4th meeting, say aye. Or thumbs up. Raise hand, I mean. And any opposed, please say nay or raise your hand. All right, it looks like the minutes are approved by a vote of 7-0. Next item on the agenda is the invitation of comments by Mayor Cole. Kevin would invite you to share any thoughts that you've had in the last couple of days.
Yeah, thank you again for everybody participating in this and the work that you're putting in. It's looks like you guys made some really good progress last week. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention is Monday, the 22nd. Yeah, Monday, February the 22nd, regular council meeting. So 2 weeks from last night. We are scheduling our quarterly staff update on the utility billing issues. So we'll have that in front of council, obviously inviting everybody to take a look and see that presentation. But in addition, I believe staff is preparing several ordinance changes that were kind of put on hold back when Raftellus was getting started. So we could let's Raftellus do their work and then come back and move forward on some of those ordinance changes as well. So that Monday night is going to be a lot about utility billing. So Denise and Steve and team, if y'all can, especially after tonight, get as many of your recommendations that you've already agreed upon, dispensed of, to us. That way we can put them on that same agenda for the 22nd and move them to council and go ahead and get moving on them. So that way, we're kind of doing them in packages that way. But I just encourage you to keep the good work. Sounds like everything was flowing real well the other night. Obviously, from you guys, we want every single one of you to be a part of a team effort and an effort to bring about true solutions for this system, and then ultimately coming out of it that we've repaired the trust with our citizens here. So and that's going to take each one of us being positive about this experience, being positive about our city. Doesn't mean that we have to agree 100% on everything, but being positive and remaining so through the process. So with that, I just appreciate each one of you and what you're doing and the time and effort you're taking to make it happen. So that's all I've got for tonight.
Thank you,
All right,
Mayor.
thanks, Mayor Cole, and we concur. We'll be working through the package of recommendations, so to speak, with supporting comments and supplemental information. Denise has got a draft of that that she's put together, and I'm about halfway through it with my suggestions. So certainly knowing this target date of the 22nd is very helpful. And then one of our main topics of discussion on the agenda for tonight is going to be the 3230 plan and information requests that may be necessary for us to really understand that fully and move forward. So certainly we'll have that prepped and well in time for that meeting.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, and I'm not sure when your next, what your meeting schedule is going to be like past tonight, but I'm trying to think. We'll have an agenda meeting the 17th. So that agenda will be more officially set by the 17th. So, something early next week. And I think I told Denise, make your request to me so I can place it on the agenda. But we'll have an agenda meeting for the 22nd on the 17th.
Kevin, do we have to be specific on the 17th if we're still working? Or could we just get a placeholder on the agenda? And
generally speaking, the Thursday packet for the agenda usually goes out to council on the 18th, that Thursday. So, in a perfect world, we'll have the agenda request and then whatever your write-up is following that. So I think if we know we've got an agenda item coming for the 17th, and if we can get some backup by the 18th to go up in that packet, we should be able to make that work. I envision having, and if you'll notice, in the last 3 months, anything that's been water billing, utility billing related, it goes up front in those agendas. We have our consent agenda, and then we go right into utility billing to highlight the importance that it is, not only with me, but with our community. And so I would envision somehow this update, ordinance changes, and y'all's recommendations to kind of all be bam, 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 in this agenda. So.
thank you, Mayor. We'll
Thank
take an action item to have a submission to you prior to the 17th.
All right, thank you again, Kevin and Denise. Our agenda for this evening, since we spent a good amount of time really working through item 3A, and we have produced a rough draft, the beginning of those supplemental comments. And I apologize, I was not able to get all the way through that. My recommendation here, Denise, would be that we give everybody an opportunity, once you and I are solid on our draft of those supplemental comments, and then distribute that for actual approval at our next meeting, which will be some time between now and the agenda meeting that Kevin just referenced. You think that makes sense, or do you want to try to work through it and kind of review it while live tonight?
I think it's a lot. We can take it's. I sent it to John and to Nancy to put it out as a draft, so it's out there on the website in a draft state. We can try to look at it, and if we get mired too much, we can back out. Or I'm good with going to 3230. You've looked at the document.
I did get about halfway through it, and I'm going to suggest just a little bit of a structuring kind of within those paragraphs, and I think that might facilitate kind of our review of that. And if everybody has the opportunity to review and comment again between now and the next meeting, I think that might be most efficient. Because I think the collective notes between you and John are solid and comprehensive. I think it's just a matter of drafting it in a way that befits kind of our recommendations to council.
Okay. We'll take that as an action item as well then, to finish that and get that ready for a review by team members prior to the next meeting.
Okay, great. Per our conversation towards the end of our last meeting, the consensus of the team was to fast forward on the agenda down to item 4B, which is review of recommendation 6. And I think we've got a good amount of information to hear from both staff and Raftellus, and that I've got some prepared questions. But we want to have the opportunity, I think, to hear both from staff and Raftellus on their thoughts on 3230, and then continue on with agenda item 5 to, again, kind of refine the framework for our discussions around the additional recommendations that the committee might come up with before we move forward. So I'm recommending, unless there's objection, that we move down to agenda item 4B at this point. All right, with no objections, what I'm going to recommend first is that we hear from staff. And John, I guess you and Nancy really could take this one here. We hear from staff based on your memo in response to the Raftellus report, the background behind the comments that you made pursuant to this recommendation 6. Give us some thoughts on that, please.
Sure. So good evening, everybody. I'll get started. I do want to say, we'll follow up with a lot more detail on each one of these alternatives. We're putting together a memo right now. We've already done a lot of work on some of the requests we've already gotten relative to 3230 from this group. So first of all, that arrearage amount and nailing that down, I think that's number one on many of your minds. So we're working through that, both a kind of an approach following a similar approach that Raftellus did, and then looking at what would it take for us to do those manual calculations in the test environment, basically run those bills to get that number locked down. So that's first and foremost. And then second, as we think about some of these options, we need to talk about the year-end accrual, and there's a lot of depth to that. And I want to get someone from accounting to do a nice write-up for us, and we're working on that this week. And then Nancy has some more in-depth thoughts about each one of these options that we have in writing now and are working on formalizing and getting back to you guys. So I'll do kind of the 30,000 foot view. Nancy can jump in if I missed anything at that 30,000 foot view, and then we will have more information for you guys coming forward. But kind of just our thoughts on the recommendation number 6. This was obviously one we did not put a recommendation forth on, from our perspective. This was a policy decision. 3230 now is kind of the law of the land, so we didn't feel like it was appropriate for us to step out and say we should move away, we shouldn't. I do want to start with option number one, the disregard unbilled consumption. From here, this is where the accrual really matters a lot. And Raftelis is correct in stating that, the estimated amount of the arrearage they put together is an actuarial estimate, not an actual loss in revenue. But if we were to go option one, and I'm making this up, let's say, July 1st, we're going to cut over and disregard the unbilled usage. That amount would hit our books at the end of the fiscal year. So it would become very real very fast. In our write-up too, it's worth noting that at the end of fiscal year 2020, we finished about 1.2% over on our revenue. And there was, I think, about 4% on expenditures left on the table. So there are some resources that we could allocate to defray some of that unbilled amount. So if we were to take that hit at the end of the fiscal year, there is some funds there to absorb that. I do want to just make you all aware, we on the water and sewer fund side, we issue debt to finance capital projects just like we do on the government side. And those bond covenants that are set forth in those issuances are very important that we adhere to. So going below those bond covenant amounts really isn't an option. And if we do that as a city, if we say we're going to go below the bond covenants, our credit rating could take a hit, and that could mean higher interest rates on those debt issuances, and will cost the city a lot of money in the long run. So we want to make sure we're staying above those thresholds too. So the unbilled consumption piece, I think Raftelis can talk a little more about this, but logistically is probably the easiest one for us to do because we would start basically fresh with new billing cycles. It's just the financial component is such a large part of that. Translating the unbilled consumption into arrears and billing over time.
Hey, John, if you don't, I apologize. Just a quick question, because you referenced the 2020 numbers came in a small percentage over, and then you mentioned some planned expenditures were not made, maybe to the tune of 4%. So all of that is relative to budget, I'm guessing, and just to clarify.
Yes.
And so, given then the following impact on bond issuance and the credit rating and all that kind of stuff, were there any issues in 2019 related to the underbilling? In other words, were there any negative consequences that came out of it as it was impacted on the 2019 budget or relative to the 2019 budget?
So we finished over in revenue in 2019, which was due to the larger than anticipated accrual. The water billing, arrearage issue came up in our discussions with Moody and with Fitch last year. And the response we gave them was, we've talked this through with council and we have a plan to catch up over a number of years, and we're going to commit to staying over our bond covenants and meeting all of our obligations. So from their perspective, there wasn't an issue, but so I think that answers your question.
Question? Just as a comment, as you go through each of these, please include what implications it may have to get going forward the current billing cycle on time. Recognizing that one of the reasons we're having to take so long is this is trying to calculate all this stuff. So going forward, of prime importance is to get that bill within 4, 5, 6 days as a meter read. And
Yep.
so the implications in terms of having to do some back calculations and maybe do some additional billing plays a role in that.
Yes. And Raftelis might have to jump in here, but I think on all three of these options, it's kind of a hard date where we would catch up in 1 month, and basically you're doing it right away. The 3230 plan we know is over the course of several years, but the catch up, getting us in that ideal range would happen right away with each one of these. And Seth, if you want to correct me if I'm wrong on that. Seth might be muted.
I think he might be muted, but yeah, John, you are correct. I believe out of all three of these options, this one provides the clearest opportunity to do kind of that clear cut over, like you've referenced, to just start basically with a clean slate as far as synchronizing the billing and meter reading cycles.
So moving along to option number 2 here, I think in terms of logistics, this would be probably the most difficult for us to do. And Nancy, I don't know, you can jump in after I finish here if we figured out if it's impossible or not. But basically, what this option is, we're going to take whatever Joe resident owes divided by a certain number of months, and then you pay it out over the course of 6 months or whatever it is. For an individual, we do payment plans all the time, and that's not hard to do a one-on-one basis. But I think where we hit the challenges, we're talking about 36,000 plus accounts. Nancy, I don't know if you want to talk a little more in the weeds on that.
I'd be happy to. As John said, I'll echo the same thing. This would be the most difficult, if not the most difficult option to do. This would require us to work with IT to come up with some type of script. So for each one of these customers to be set up on some type of plan, basically. And if they choose to pay this off, then you've got to be able to have that as an understanding. And the other concern I have too is with the customer service representatives, knowing that where that customer stands in that and can the software system handle something like this? That's where my concern is. I just want to jump back to option number 1. That would be also a script that customers would, that IT would have to come up with a script for us, that they would have to take the unbilled readings and we would have to take the last unbilled reading and put it into the system in a way that it doesn't bill all those customers, and then start that process up. And then we get to option 3, I can talk about that one for a little bit more.
So jump into option 3. Option 3 is actually one that we are
Can I
talking
just
about.
ask how difficult, I think I see Daniel online, just how difficult and time consuming that script would be? Is it something that you've done in the past? Is it, I just would like to try to understand that a little more.
Sure. We haven't done it in the past. We've made minor modifications. Obviously, it's New World Systems or Tyler Technologies is the vendor that we use. So we'd have to consult with them to figure out how to make that happen. It is going to be a challenge because, we want to make sure it goes out 100% correct and we don't, have any other challenges that come up or arise from doing something large scale like that.
Mr. McGinnis, got a question. Do you know if Tyler Technologies has access to go in and update the actual billing accounts such that if that option was decided, you could run billings, then say, Tyler, here's the billing files that we just ran, go into each account and plug in credits in the same amount? Is that something they would have access to?
Anything's possible on their side, right? It comes down to time, effort, and guarantee that it's going to work. So I don't know that it would be a billing file necessarily. It would, they'd have to figure out how to apply the credits to the database directly and then not have those files sent to the printer.
So I want to ask a question. This all resides in a relational database, correct?
Yes, it's in Microsoft SQL backend.
Okay.
Right.
So you could generate a report and export that file to additional software, Excel spreadsheet, another different separate database. And then you could zero it out in that software and turn right around and generate. Yes, it's a whole nother billing cycle till you get paid off, but you'd basically generate an unbilled consumption bill. But the nice thing is it's a fixed amount and it's over so much and you just got to track as to whether you got paid that month. Easy to say, I know, but my point is.
Yeah, I was gonna say
My
it's
point is
simple
you
to
don't
say.
have to, you don't have to work with New World. You could independent go standalone and resolve it and be done with whatever your duration is. And then it don't look away.
I'd have to check our contract with them just to verify that we can make those changes because they own it might void our maintenance with them.
It's your data. You're not changing their software.
You're just talking about
Data.
you're talking about downloading data, managing it offline, as opposed to trying to do it inside New World.
Recognize, I understand the issues with New World and trying to make scripts and all that, but if it's in a relational database, it's nothing more than a database report with a data transfer, and then you can manipulate it in any billing software you want. Now, it's 32,000, and there's a discussion here. I got a hybrid this thought, but all I'm making the point is from a New World Order database management standpoint, it may be easier just to zero all that out there, take it someplace else and deal with it there, and then you don't have a New World problem. Now, you got to have somebody that's going to manage that offline new billing system for a little while. Pick a number, 6 months, something. But it's finite and it's contractable, by the way. You could take that data file and go to some billing company and pay them to generate that bill and to manage that. Just a thought.
Understood. But if you take it out of that system and then put it into a third party system, you're going to have to continue. You're going to have that data indefinitely, right? Which, not saying that can't be done.
Why would you have it in?
The other challenge is,
why would you have it?
You have to keep historical. Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong. I need to be able to track that information because that is customer info.
It is customer info, and not only that, but we would also have to have, for billing purposes, you have to have the previous reading as well as their previous balances and anything else dealing with the customer's information itself. You need that last bit of it, that you want to get rid of everything else prior to that, but you've got to have that last piece of it that's still unbilled for the readings and everything and their usage and anything else that needs to go forward. You may not bill it, but you still need to have it. And so therefore, there's where my concern is as well. It's as Dan has said, Mr. McInnes has said, I do find that piece challenging. And yes, we've never done this piece, done this before. And my concern is going forward with that. Is it going to be stable enough to do something like that?
Well, if you go and zero it out, you got to know how much you go to zero, whatever date you pick, correct?
You would have to find out what date you want to go forward on that. Are you going to wait for the winter quarterly averages to be finished to be calculated? Or are we going to take last year's winter quarterly averages? Or, we're just going to push out a date,
Yeah, but the point I make is if you go and decide to write it off, you know what the amounts are by customer. At that point.
At that point, correct. So that's what Mr. Carter was saying too. We would have to also determine what that amount is. And that's something we have to go through the billing process on in the test environment so we can know each and every single one of those customers given a certain date that you all want to come with.
Right. So once I know that value, what's to keep you from putting that someplace else and give them a 6-month payment plan for that balance?
Well, make it even easier, Mr. King. Why not look at the third option which is why not go ahead and change or update the billing rates? I mean, it's said by Mr. Garrison as well. It's all based on what your rates are for that unbilled amount. So if you look at the fact that you might want to think about changing, updating the rates for, say, a 3-month bill, we could bill the customers for their 2 bills and their current bill, update the rates, put a moratorium on the late fees, and then that way you're charging the customers for that amount without us writing it off or whatever the case is. Based on whatever the rates are, we can put the rates at what it can be for a 3-month bill because it'll be 2 months unbilled and then that current bill that we can then get back on track with. That can actually be done in the system now without any scripting.
Nancy, what would that, so just in my household, when you're saying that, I'm trying to think about what's that rate going to look like and what's my bill going to look like?
And that's something we would have to work through, Ms. Hewitt. You would have to say, that's something that you as the committee would look at, and there's different ways of looking at it. Could you want to take someone's average bill, and their average bill is say for 3,000 gallons, and the 3-month bill would be 9,000 gallons? Do you want to incorporate a rate in such a way that they're actually being billed, they're paying for 3,000? So therefore you can update the tiers in such a way that instead of the tiers being 0 to 22.90 right now for 32 days, they can go 0 to say 10,000 gallons for the first tier. That's just something to look at. That can be done so much easier without scripting, without IT, without putting New World involved. For us here in the billing, what we would do is we would update the rates to what y'all feel, update the rates to reflect that of a 3-month billing for a customer. We would update the rates. We would bill each cycle accordingly, and they would be billed for 3 months. Of course, this is going out with communication out for the public and so forth. Put a moratorium again on late fees. We've done it once. We could do it again. And then go ahead and give the customers 3 months to pay the bills, without any kind of late fees, and then start the process back up again.
And then you would just deal with your historical delinquency who's not paying on time, right? I mean,
right.
You got to know what that percentage is off the top of your head. So,
right.
You've got late pays.
And all the things that we have already in the system itself, people who have people who already have penalties from their previous bills, people who already have, other fees involved, that can all be still go over. The only thing we're going to change is the rate structure itself. And after you bill the customers that 3-month bill, then you can look at referring back, going back to the bill rate or the rate structure we had back in January fiscal 20, before we think about doing another rate change, say in fiscal 22.
So can I add a caveat to that? What if you offered me, I don't know, 5% to write you a check? And so I pay mine right off, right up front. And therefore I would have zero balance. So what would that do if there was that rate change? Because I'm assuming that rate has to go across all accounts, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's where and that type of caveat would be very difficult to do, Ms. Hewitt. I'm looking at the fact of, you're changing the rates for all accounts going across the board. And you want someone to give a discount to them for paying ahead of time. That's something that we would have to look at that as an adjustment on the account.
I'm just wondering if that would get you a lion's share of accounts caught up immediately, right? And then you would just have maybe a little bit more than your late pays percentage-wise.
Yeah.
And even that, I mean, you can. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just thinking through the process itself of looking at it being an adjustment on the account. If someone says that they want to pay it ahead of time, you would have to go through the adjustment process and thinking, all right, so do you take what their current balance is and then take off 10% of that and then put that as a straight adjustment on the account? I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be done. It probably can be done, but it's just something we can look at in that. But it also, but given the fact that you're going to bill it out and customers have more of an opportunity to make that payment, I can see why you want to go ahead and put some type of credit into it, saying so that people can pay it a little bit faster and also get a credit on it. But they're already
get revenue faster too, right?
Yeah. But if you're
thinking, the thing that I struggle with, Nancy, is that by no action on the customer's part, did they get in this on their own accord? As customers, we're all dealing with the city's faux pas, right? Mm-hmm. And so I keep, when I hear it's going to be difficult, I keep thinking, well, where should the difficulty burden be borne? And so I'm not saying that we should run you through a meat grinder, but I think we have to keep in mind what's in the best interest of the water billing customers that are behind by however many days it is, right?
Right.
So that's the balance. That's the challenge. I'm like, well, if you gave me 5%, I'd write you a check.
Mhm.
Is Miss
What if
Massey?
today-
Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, I was just wondering today, if somebody wrote you a check for, 3 times, 4 times what the bill was, you're just going to show that as a credit on the account, correct?
You do. You would, if they wrote it over their amount. So if their bill was for $100, they write a check for $300, right? You would have a credit of $200 on their account. But,
And the software would just work that off until it was paid before you generated a bill. And you would generate a bill, but it would show a positive balance.
It would show a negative balance. It would show a credit balance. Correct. Yeah, it will show a credit balance. But my other question is,
Yeah, if you can tell them how much they're worth and they're willing to pay it now, it would be treated the same.
and what you can, that's what I'm saying. You can go ahead and do that, but you're asking the customer to make the payment. I can see Ms. Hewitt's point of giving them some type of an encouragement to give them a 5% discount or a 10% discount, and then providing that as we would do it as some type of an adjustment on the account itself. If they want to pay off the whole thing, we can give them, we could do that. That would be an easier process for us to do here in this office. The other way you were mentioning is the fact that, okay, we're going to tell you your whole bill is $300 and you're going to write a check for $500 and you're going to have a $200 credit. That's not much of an incentive, but yet if you can update the rates to reflect a 3-month bill, and if they want to pay that off, we could treat it as an adjustment. We could look into that process of doing that process itself. And that would be simpler, and in our eyes here in billing, in the processes itself, because that can be done here in this office.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. So with everything we have going on, I think we've established the fact that this is the city's issue. I think that we need to step back. What are our implications financially with the bond ratings and so forth if we wipe it off and start over? Is that something that the city that we can afford to do? If it's not, then what can we do from there to get a little piece of it back? If it is charging all that unbilled water at tier 1 rates to get enough money to put us in good standing, I think everybody would like for us just to say it's our problem and for it to go away. So instead of figuring out how we can bill for all of it and make it work, what if we went the other way? And what are we able to forgive and it not be a big impact on us financially?
So
I can
wait,
take a crack at that.
Yeah,
Let me take a shot at that. So great question. And I think what we all need to keep in mind with the enterprise fund is that it's essentially a business. It's a not-for-profit, but it's a business. It's a self-sustaining fund. There's no property taxes coming in or anything like that. It's really water and sewer revenue with some other fees associated that support the fund. So while I don't disagree with anyone that this is the city's doing, when we talk about, forgiving that revenue, it's got to come from somewhere else. And we will get solid numbers for you guys about what the cash on hand is that we have over and above our bond covenants. So we'll have that number for you. The Raftellus report mentions that we don't want to do a rate increase to cover for this one-time, forgiveness of outstanding revenue. But that's the only other option other than cash on hand for us to pay for that. There's not another source of revenue. I mean, we could propose moving property taxes over, but I don't think that's going to fly with anybody. So it is. Yes, sir.
Error and omission insurance. I brought this up a couple times last year. The fact is the enterprise fund loses money every month because of the 28-day meter read cycle. People move in, renters specifically, that live here a year, they get 12 months of service, they pay 10 bills. They got 2 months for free. And who eats it? The residents. And it's 100% because of the 28-day cycle. In December, I asked staff and council to start the process of identifying all accounts that moved in after October 1, 2018 through current that have closed out, how long they lived here, how many months, account active, how many bills did they receive, and the difference is money the enterprise fund lost because of the 28-day meter read decision, which was an honest mistake. That's what error and omission insurance is for. And I'm ballparking, but based on information y'all put out, number of moves every month, I'm thinking it's between $1 million and $2 million. So, I mean, that is revenue. It is a revenue source.
Yeah, I have to get with our legal department about the specifics of that, but we can definitely follow up about the errors and omissions insurance.
Hey guys, quick question on not being able to calculate this per account. And I maybe this is a new world in Tyler Technologies question, but why can't we make that simple? And if not, what can they do to support us?
That's something that I'd like to talk to Dan about. We can reach out to Tyler Technologies and New World to see, go from your question, Mayor Cole, and see what we can look at for that number, and go and see what they can offer to us. And what kind of cost would that be at as well?
Sure.
They're going to be doing it. They would be looking at a script as well, and that type of cost would be, and the time frame involved. That's something else that needs to be considered as well. It's not something that they're going to drop everything and do this for us. This could be anywhere. I'm seeing it where it's at least 3 months, even longer, depending on what type of project it is. So
and again, if we're doing it in-house versus we have them do it, I mean, that staff being tied up, not handling day-to-day, number one, but number two, just any expedited issues that are popping up and trying to resolve this. And so it seems like to me, we have a software company, we have meter reads, we have the reads, so we have the data. It's a matter of putting the data together and coming up with a number per account as to what it is. And so I don't know, and I'm maybe I'm naive in saying this, but I would think a programmer would be able to figure that out fairly simple, I would think, and being able to apply that to our account. I mean, this isn't an infinite number of accounts, and yeah, there's a lot of data, but we know the meter reads and we know our rates. Seems like we could calculate that. So,
Mayor Cole, and I'll review the February 1st meeting video again, because I thought in that Nancy had already said that they knew how they could get to this unbilled consumption number, and it was going to be like 16 hours of overtime.
no, it's going to be. We calculated that out again, Mr. Davis, and it's going to be much longer than that. It's not, you're talking 38,000 accounts in 1 month. And so now you've got to do that 2 months worth of it. So we were going through the process on that right now. We were looking at, when we're doing the whole billing cycle currently, when we looked at it just recently, again, we looked at almost 40 hours worth just to get that data on just 1 month's worth. Yeah, so it's not something, and that just on top. And my concern too is, and I can see Mayor Cole's point too, staff is also doing day-to-day operations, and we're continuing with the billing process, but we're asking the billing staff to turn around and say, okay, now we need to pull them off of that and do this all in the test environment to get down to that number, and that's something that we're trying to ascertain that number in other, in other ways as possible.
All right. So that initial 16 hours that we were told was
Light.
short.
It's more like 40 hours now.
Yeah. One.
If I can interject something here, we've got a couple of documents that primarily our charter is asking us as a group to comment on those documents, the Raftellus report and the staff report. I still have a couple of questions on the staff response, and I don't know if they're best served asking on this call as opposed to sending an email and then doing a follow-up later. But in option 2, and John, I'm assuming you're authoring this, so maybe you can shed a little light on this. Raftellus has not confirmed that the calculation of the unbilled arrearage is possible in New World systems, nor provided adequate detailed steps to complete this approach. So I think my question to Raftellus is, does Raftellus know how to calculate this? And then given a lot of the comments that I think I've heard people on the committee make, we've got a working assumption here that this data manipulation, that this programming, that this processing of raw data probably can be done more quickly than some of us are thinking about, right? And we don't know the time, and we don't know the cost. It'd be a lot better. We'd have some firm responses to be able to get back to the public and a basis on which to make a more solid recommendation. So I'd like to hear from Raftellus as to, have you guys thought through this? Do you have a plan? If we said, hey, this needs to be done, what would your third-party perspective bring to the table here on actually getting to this number of calculating either by account or in the whole what the average is by account?
Yeah, and Steve, if I can take that, this is Seth Garrison. When we performed the calculation to check the billing against the New World system, we extracted the data out of the system and basically duplicated the math that was going on in New World in order for us to figure out whether or not the accounts were billing correctly. So, you know, we can easily extract the data out of the system. Anybody can easily extract the data, perform the calculations to figure out how much is owed given the assumptions. The difficulty, I think, is as Nancy and John have discussed, is then how do you get that back into the system to go ahead and then bill appropriately and to have that be registered in the system? How is that set up? But I think making the calculations and figuring out what's owed is a fairly simplistic matter to do that.
I think, you know, it's important to note, I think that in this, it goes back to citizen communication a minute. And I don't object to manipulating the base rates in order to play the catch up in some period of time, but the public is going to view, our citizens are going to view that as more smoke and mirrors, hand waving. You're going to have to tell them how much they owe. And we can decide on whether they pay that back or whether we do it over some period of time, or we have a hybrid, is with my suggestion. But the point I make is that you got to explain to them, this is what the plan is, this is how we're doing it, and how we're going to implement to get there, and so that you rebuild some confidence. But if you just go in there and say, oh, we don't know how much you are, but we're going to adjust the rates, and when we think you're done, we're going to adjust it back, that's not going to fly. That is not going to fly. You are going to have to tell them, hey, I'm 2 months in arrears, and this is how much I owe you.
Yeah, I'd like to, Ralph, I'd like to kind of pick that up and build on a little bit and just ask some more specific questions. So, again, the Raftellus team, and Seth specifically, if your comments are that the actual calculation, at least in principle, is somewhat simple. Has it been done? Is it in a document somewhere that we could reference it, even if it's at a point in time in the past or in the future? And can we get to that number that says, you know, if a citizen calls and requests, hey, what's my number as of this date? Can we answer that question? And then accordingly, can we do this in the whole before we even get to how we're going to resolve it?
It can be calculated. The caveat, I think, though, is you have to agree on the assumptions of how the calculations are going to be made. That is the biggest challenge that I see is, you know, is it going to be under the first tier of consumption, the second tier of consumption? How do you want to treat the calculations? You need to know the formula for how that's made. And that's been, I think, some of the debate and discussion up until this point.
Yeah, I think a reasonable group of informed people could come up with a straw man proposal within a day that could make that list of assumptions. And then really you're down to data processing. I mean, if my perspective and Ralph's perspective and Denise's perspective and Jimmy's perspective really is that this can be done, and it should be done. why isn't it done already? I guess is my question as a citizen. What's the answer to that question?
In my comment, mine on his comment, in terms of what rate, it's 2 months. What's the total for 2 months? Divide by 2. We know the number. We know the formula by consumption as to what rate to apply. Apply it.
That's not how they're calculated. It's not 2 months. It's depending on the consumption. There are different amounts that you're billed per consumption for that period of time. So if you use X amount of gallons, it's at one rate. If it's X plus some number 500, then it's 2 tiers.
Yeah, I understand, but if the amount is 2 tiers, so what?
Well, hold on, Ralph. So Seth, if the group said, let's get the number, let's base it all at the first tier, 406, 408, whatever it is per thousand, and we gave you those parameters, it would be an easy calculation, right?
It would be a straightforward calculation, yes.
Okay. So that really, we just need to decide as a committee what we want it at. Look, since this has been so dragged out for so many years, to do what's best for the customer, if we wanted to have it where they still had to pay, make it all at the lowest consumption tier and get the number.
Yeah, Jimmy and Seth, my question is that if you know the total amount and we know how many gallons it is, and so all I'm making the point is it's the same calculation on a tier basis that you do every month. How's this any different?
I will say this, if the assumption is this, that if it was billed on a monthly basis, if you would accumulate all that water together, you would be into higher tiers. If you did it all at one period, the assumption was that we don't know what tier that water would have been billed at if it had been billed regularly over the last couple of years. So I think a good assumption, if you want to benefit the customers, is to bill it at the lower tier or calculate it based on the lowest tier.
Yeah, I concur with Jimmy's comment on that. I mean, you go to the lowest possible assumption and you run a calculation and permit me to get in my box here for less than 60 seconds. We've had a lot of chatter, a lot of conversation about rate manipulation. Council's already gone through that process and made a decision on that. Nancy is suggesting that, maybe a solution here is a temporary rate change. De facto, 30/30 is a rate manipulation that is being disguised to the consumers already, right? So that ship has already sailed. So when it comes down to making a decision or making assumptions on what rate to apply, just make one, right? Like just make one. And then we take whatever that is calculated to be and we compare it to this word in John's memo here that says loss, the loss of revenue. I mean, from my perspective as a citizen, loss relative to what? 2 years in a row, we met the budget. 2 years in a row, we basically met covenants in loan agreements or in bond agreements. So is it a loss? Could we get more? Sure. How much more is good? How much more is better? I don't know. Does it even matter? I don't think so. And I think Councilman Owens, was on his pulpit talking about that very issue at the council meeting 2 weeks ago. It's not going to matter. And then knowing what the data is then allows the rate setters, which is city council, to make a decision going forward relative to the bond commitments and relative to the budget. It's a clean slate. They're fully informed. They know where they are, and what's fair is fair going on down the road. And that's my big problem with this is all this diatribe about trying to repair this and take care of the past and the future at the same time has made it so complicated that we don't know where we're going anymore.
And one of the things I think we also need to agree, if we're talking about the unbilled consumption, you have monthly base charges that people paid. I've lived here, this month is 8 years. So I've paid base charges for 96 months. So I think, our base charges and today's base covers 2,290 gallons. When you do that calculation, if there's 2 unread meter reads, I think we also need to make sure we're backing out that 5,580 gallons. And then you build the tiers above. You build a consumption above it.
Mr. Davis, you said the 2 base charges, so that'd be the 2290 times 2, sir?
Yes, ma'am. If it's 2
Okay.
unread, if it's 2 meter reads that's still unbilled, then it's 2 outstanding. I think that's where pretty much all of us are at now.
Okay, that's 4,580. Okay. You said
Oh,
5,000.
I'm sorry.
I just want
I'm
to
sorry. That's what I get for doing math in my head.
It's okay. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yes, ma'am. You're totally right. Thank you for that.
So let me interject one other thing here to think about, and Nancy or John can correct me if I'm wrong, but this formula that we're talking about potentially calculating based on the lowest tier makes sense, I think, for residential customers, but for commercial customers who use a lot more than a minimum and maybe well up into the additional tiers, they would be getting a substantial discount relative to the residential folks using that minimum tier formula.
Well, and my comment ahead is kind of is based on the Pareto chart that was for the discussion about the consumption values, and there is a substantial population, but a very small population that uses a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
And I would suggest that we break them out and treat them completely separate. They're unique, but the point I make is when I'm using, pick a number, 1 million, 2 million, 10 million gallons a month, I whatever we calculate that they owe using the flip tier, those are the ones that I would be very, 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 very reluctant to write off, be straight up. I think you have to have a conversation with them, say, here's the unbilled consumption. Now, would you like to pay this? But they're a small set. You're talking less than 300. So, but my point, and that's my view. But I agree with you. You cannot treat those large consumers like you do the regular resident.
If you take
So can I jump in on that?
charge it off of what their meter size is, the base rate for their meter, it's kind of everybody's paying their fair share, I guess you could say, almost to a point. If you just charge everybody 2 base rates, then, the amount of funds coming back cuts the bleeding. You don't have to worry about the production rates. You don't have to worry about the tiers or any of that. Everybody has two base rates for those 2 months, and that's even fair. We've given up the water. Because the biggest thing is like John had said, this is not a non-for-profit because it has to fund itself. But as my business, whatever I have to forgive in order to gain my consumer confidence is what I have to do, no matter what kind of arrears it puts me in. So if we did just the base rate for 2 months, for the water and the sewer, so no production rates after that, after the 2,000, and move on about our business, how do those numbers make up enough to where we can say we cut the bleeding? But then we gave a bunch, up.
Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure.
You're on, Mark.
Okay, so I've got a couple of thoughts on that, and so someone from the city, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that commercial users are already being charged a higher rate. I guess I don't know if a gallon of water for a commercial entity is more expensive than a residential. So I don't know if somebody can correct me on that.
Mr. Smith, you are correct. As the base charges, of course, are going to be a little bit more because they're larger meters in many respects, as well as their tier cost is higher. It's higher than the residential cost is.
Right. So hopefully I'm not being too I guess forward when I say this, but businesses don't vote, residents do. the citizens of the city do. So, I think that businesses were maybe a little unfairly targeted with the rate change a while back. So to single them out for paying the full amount this time too seems a little unfair as well.
I would agree. And the idea about the two base charges, so I just pulled the bill I paid last month. A sewer charge and a water base was more than my consumption for water above the base. So yeah, an idea of charging two base charges, that would be a problem for me, not to mention the fact that the ordinance says base charges are monthly. So to say we're going to charge 2 extra months, we're now recommending going against what our ordinance says. So I don't think that would be a good.
Well, that
I think in concept though, that it's a neat idea. I mean, I don't know if it's two base rates or one or whatever it is. In concept, unbelievably basic and simple.
Can I throw something out for the group to hear as well? On option 3 that I was talking about, I know, the rates and all that, but when we go out and bill this, we're only going to bill one base rate. It would be one base rate, for the current bill, and then the unbills would not have that base rate on there. And so just throwing that out there as a possibility for y'all to think about.
Before we jump to that thought, can I summarize what I think I'm hearing the committee say? And Mr. Sabo, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what I think you guys are hovering around, and I just want to make sure we capture this because I think it's good conversation and feedback, is the kind of what we're talking about now is kind of an alternate version of that third option, the full bill catch up. And what we're talking about doing is taking the volumetric consumption, so everything not included in the base rate, 2,000 some odd gallons and up, and we're going to bill that at that first tier, so the lower tier for residential. And then once we have that amount, we can compare that to the accrual, the quote unquote lost revenue, and quantify what that delta is. And we can look at the cash on hand and then look at the full picture there. Does that kind of get to what you guys are getting at?
I think it is. I think it invokes a lot of the arguments for simplicity here that I think both Ref Tellis and staff have made with regards to what a headache 3230 will be along its course and at final resolution. I think it treats some amount of the arrearage. I think it takes into consideration kind of where we stand in versus budget in 2020, 2019, and probably 2021. I think you summed it up fairly well, and I think it demands this data manipulation, this calculation that we all seem to be wanting, just to try to equilibrate the funds here so we can make some sense of what this means relative to budget.
Yeah, and to make it clear, I think this is just all around how do we get that number. I don't think this is saying we're going down the path that we're wanting to, that we're going to endorse option 3 or a hybrid thereof. We're just kind of talking about how do we get to the number, so then we can decide do we want 1, 2, or 3.
Absolutely understood. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to be fair there, Jimmy, I believe that I picked up comments from committee members here and from staff desiring to try to move this towards one of these options. I agree with you that we, quote, haven't made a decision yet, would be way premature, but certainly we're talking about trying to do this in such a way that simplifies life for everybody and seems very transparent and fair to the public.
This is certainly one, but I think it's too premature to rule out option 1. I don't think option 2, yeah, Nancy said it would be a world of challenges for them, and I agree, but I definitely think it's 1 or 3 or a hybrid of 3, but we're not ready to rule it out because I do know our mayor was on TV saying he thinks we should be able to eat it. And there's a whole lot of people saying, yeah, that's what they think. So we just need to.
Yeah, just trying to grab consensus here. I would tend to agree with you. I think most of our comments are centering on 1 and 3.
Hey, real quick, Jimmy, I also want to make sure that that comment that I actually made it is not taken out of context, as was with the snippet of the clip, because what you didn't see is the follow-up of that comment. And I said, but I also want to make sure that we have no unintended consequences financially as a result of doing something like that, like bond rating and those types of things moving forward. We got into this with unintended consequences, and we don't need to create an unintended consequence on the back end. And they cut that part of that snippet. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Before we continue, did Jennifer Sheffield be able to come back on?
I did.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to interject one more item into the conversation here. And as I'm reading through the Raftellus report, and they're talking about, hey, consider some other options, alternatives to 3230. And they're making some arguments around the challenges of 3230. One we haven't talked about yet is how it will complicate the AMI rollout. And we talked a little bit during our last conversation about the need for a really solid project plan, clear goals, great KPIs, and benchmarking or best practice development, prior to jumping into AMI. And for me, this is an important aspect of evaluating whether 3230 really works for us, because you're about to put a whole bunch of design, much less operations effort, into the implementation of AMI, knowing full well that 3230 will complicate that going down the road and just likely adding costs to that eventually the user is going to bear. So I'm curious if there are any other comments from staff or Raftellus or the committee around how you guys see AMI in the context of this conversation.
I think we might want to, I think Raftellus had some good feedback on AMI just generally, so maybe we want to start with them, and then Nancy and I can fill in any blanks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously one of the benefits of the AMI tool is to allow customers to see sort of what their usage is and be able to equate that back to a bill. So if there is a lag between, the billing period and when the reading period or what's going on with the meter, that creates some confusion. So that was our sort of our main issue there, is ideally you want to get to a place where what you're being billed is what you're seeing as usage on the meter, and there's a direct correlation with that.
I can see your concern too, Chairman Savoy, because of the of what AMI will bring to the table. We're looking at bringing in readings and bringing in that information, and it would be advantageous to be current with that information. In other words, we're running into this issue. We're concerned right now with our issue of being able to switch those water meters from the drive-by system into an AMI system, and we're going to have to do it, throughout the city in small numbers. So given the fact of where we're at with 3230, that will be something that will be a problem for us in the sense of that you're looking at the readings that are going to be in the past, and and they're always going to hold on to those, yes, but it'd be nice if everything was into the present tense. And it'd be easier for customers, easier for us to have a conversation with customers and going forward. So what Mr. Garrison said in Raftellus is just that.
I think one thing that's important to note, and we've had this conversation, I think the meeting before, the biggest number one issue is high consumption bills. And that is the one that has had the biggest impact in terms of lost confidence from the citizens and the users. And being 2 months behind in billing makes it impossible to determine what is the root cause of these high consumption, odd one-off occurrences. And so whatever it takes to get us within a normal data value of 40 days or less, so that we can then do root cause on these one-off high consumption issues, whether it's real or Memorex or something else, I don't know. But you have to do that in order to accomplish it. And if 3230 continuing prevents us from being able to do that, we're going to have to do something with 3230 post-quit. That's just my opinion. But from a root cause failure analysis, we're driving around looking at looking at what we ran over with all the seats turned backwards in the car. We're seeing data 2 months late, and you can't figure out where you're going and what you're hitting.
And don't forget, city council direction when they adopted 3230 back in April 2020, they made it clear that residents are going to have to be able to get caught up. The city's going to have to give them the number. It's going to need to be by the time AMI, that's what staff committed. When AMI is ready to go, we'll have the number. So they're either everybody moves away from 3230 or staff's going to have two billing models. And that would be wow, I wouldn't want to be over that department.
Can I just take a second? Where are you, John? Can you give us on the action item of what you're going to go off and do in, I guess, the next few days, and when you think you'll have it? I'm thinking it's sort of a white paper explanation and recommendation.
Yes, absolutely. So my follow-up, our follow-up from staff is going to be exactly what you said, white paper write-up. That's going to cover the year-end accrual and how that plays implications into what we're discussing today. That's going to factor into the quote-unquote lost revenue that we talked about. We're going to come back with more details on kind of the pros and cons of each one of the options here in writing, so you guys can have that. And then 3, we're going to calculate what the arrearage is and come back with an SOP on how we do that, get your guys' feedback on that and consensus that makes sense. And then 4, we're going to put numbers to the scenario that was outlined by the committee today, essentially that kind of 3B option where we're looking at the non-base consumption and billing that at the lowest tier and what that looks like.
And I guess one of the things
I'd like to add and stay on the discussion about using Raftilus as your calculator. I think think you need to have a discussion with them as to what does that take and how much is it going to cost, and is that what that does on the timeline basis.
Exactly. That was something I was going to ask for, if we can know what it would cost for them to do that.
Just to be clear, for them to do the write-up or for them to do a calculation?
To do the calculation.
Okay.
Seth, can you take that as an action?
Yeah, I can. Just to be aware, we had a limited amount of hours to participate in this ad hoc committee process. If we're going to do additional calculations, we'll have to get another extension to that.
If you could get us an idea, even how many hours you're talking and what's going to be required. Is that doable, Seth?
Yeah, we can take that as a follow-up and work with Raftilus on that.
And John, one thing, I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy, but the amount that gets bantered around for accruals, I've always been somewhat doubtful of. Do y'all have a better handle than $12 million now?
We do, and that'll be in that write-up in a lot more detail for you guys to dive into.
Okay, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that 12 million include base charges and all the outstanding meter reads?
It includes base charges for all those service periods. It does. And again, there'll be write-ups about why that is. And I think we can get into that then, but yes.
Thank you.
When can we look for that, John, you think?
My goal is this Friday to have it. I think we're meeting again on Monday, is to have it Friday ready for you guys to review on Monday. That's my goal. We do have to get the agenda item out for the quarterly update, so that might get in the way. But our target is to get it done Friday.
Okay, and could we sneak peek before the meeting to read?
Yeah, can it be published as soon as it's done? So maybe we have the weekend to review.
Study it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just generally, we're trying to do our best to get this stuff out here so you can dig into it before meeting. So yeah.
Thanks, sir.
You just need more L's in your workshop, that's all you need. Okay.
One question that I had also is, can you tell us, like, what the dollar, whenever you come up with a dollar amount,
Enough for today?
It can be.
Want to add to it?
Go ahead. I can barely hear you, Mr. O'Day.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yep.
Is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we find out whenever we find out what that dollar amount, can we find out what we can absorb, what the city can absorb without having any adverse effect as far as bonding capabilities, or revenue changes? I mean, obviously there's going to be a revenue change, but what we can absorb as a loss, and then that'll give us a better idea of how we need to structure the payments, or what charges, how we charge them, or how the base charges, or how the charges are made up for the 2 months if we decide to move forward.
Absolutely. Yes.
It sounds like, John, we just want to kind of like a complete packet of financials, right? Implications. So we'd be much closer to having a discussion about the options.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that's the biggest implication operationally, and then obviously the customer perspective too. But yes, absolutely.
Well, I guess one question I have too,
You'll also
as
take a
board-
look at liability insurance, right?
Yes.
One question I have too, as a board, what does everybody want to have happen? I mean, if the city can absorb the cost and it's a loss, it is what it is. It doesn't really have any adverse effect on anything except for loss of revenue. Is the board, is that something we're trying to figure out if we can afford it, or do we want to try to figure out how to get the revenue back?
Patrick, I'll say for me personally, I actually think a combination of 1 and 3. I know some people may say it's crazy to think that some people, if given the option of having the city eat it or they pay it, that people would choose to pay it, but I would. Call me crazy. But if the city said, hey, Jimmy, you owe me $50. Okay, here's my credit card. I'm paying it, even if I have the option to have it forgiven. And I think, I don't know, there may not be a lot of people like me that's willing to say, I use the water, or supposedly I use the water. I think I did, so I'll pay for it. And some people, that would be a budget breaker. 2 months of bills on top of their regular monthly bill would be a budget breaker. So I think we should have a hybrid that says, we'll tell you what you owe, but you know what? If you can't, give a credit.
Yeah, and Jimmy, I want to tie on it. The issue in terms of, we made a mistake, and we've got insurance for mistakes. And my question is, what is that insurance and how much would that offset? And then the balance after we get our insurance payment, we may eat it. I don't know.
So Ralph, when I looked at the Olson and Olson report, and y'all, please give me just a second to elaborate on this. When I looked at the Olson and Olson report, and I've listened to staff previously, and I understood in February, I think Ms. Hewitt raised the question about error and omission insurance, and their point was this is just unbilled consumption. And I understand that is not lost revenue. So what's unbilled? I understand the city's position that you can't claim that because it can still be collected. I do believe the revenue we have lost, people who, my neighbor that moved in January 2020 and moved out January 2021 at the end of my cul-de-sac, I got 10 bills. We lost 2 months of service. The insurance covers that, but I don't believe the unbilled consumption that it applies. That's not what error and omission, until you lost the money that you were due, it doesn't kick in.
I'll just make the point is if we come to the conclusion that we're not going to be able to recover this money based upon trying to get current with the 3230 and all the other implications, and then we turn right around and put the balance sheet correctly and do, that is a lost revenue.
I don't know that your insurer would necessarily accept that, because that's a conscious decision.
I didn't say they would, they were just making, that's a legal insurance discussion. All I'm making the point is I think you have to evaluate that. And I agree with Jimmy from the standpoint of certainly the people that paid 10 months and they close their account and didn't get paid 2 bills, that certainly is a claim.
So I had a quick thought on those options as well. And just to say that I don't know that 1 and 3 are necessarily mutually exclusive, in meaning that the city could eat a percentage of the overall bill and then bill the remainder to the citizens, or the users. So, the city says, okay, it was, our fault, our mistake, we'll take 30% off the total, and then 70% goes to the users in order to catch up. That's just a thought.
Well, and I think what Jimmy had said too, like doing, if you could do a combination, but then on the past due part, on the 2-month part that's being billed, people that want to pay it can pay it. People that somehow don't, but you just don't do a disconnect or late fees on that amount. So they pay it whenever they can. If somebody wants to pay it right then, they can pay it right then. They can pay it whatever, $5 a month.
I'm not sure. Nancy, could you speak to the capability of having a billed amount and late fees apply to part of a past due amount, but not another part? I gotta think that's
a nightmare. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. It's, I offered I like to offer the fact of just saying, put a moratorium on the whole thing. And then, if you thought of what the unbilled amount is, show the customers what the total unbilled amount is based on your 3230 plan, and then prevent, change, have a change on what you're looking at. That's just a thought on it, but unfortunately I can see where that could be an issue for us to just do part of it. I agree with Mr. Davis. That would be very difficult for us to do just a part of this and a part of that on what you're looking at. I'd rather do it as a whole across the board for everyone being consistent.
Yeah. Consistent.
And then, and on that too, I'd just like to say, either do 1 or 3, whatever you choose in that respect. I'm just looking for the simplest way for the staff to be able to encompass what you want to be done. And if you show that this is the amount that the total unbilled is, but yet we're going to go ahead and bill it at this amount, you're showing that as well, so that's just a thought.
Right. And I think that the best thing for us to do is, once we come up with those numbers of what we're able to absorb, what we're not, then we go back to the staff and say, okay, here's what we think ought to happen. And then you tell us how to make it work. That's way out of my league.
Thank you. I want to help.
Actually, I guess I would ask, would it be appropriate for us to go to staff to say, here, how do we make it work? Or aren't we really just advisory, and we would advise council and say, this is what we recommend. And then council says, okay, staff, council may not listen to us. We don't know, but council can say, hey, staff, how can we make it work? I mean, do we really need staff to tell us how to make something work that council may not agree with?
I think you have to, Jimmy, because you only have half your homework done, right? If we go over to the council and say, hey, we want to do this, and the council says staff, and they're like, We can't do that. I think we've got to vet it out with staff to know what's possible and what the implications and stresses on the billing of it, right?
Right, but
First
probably
that-
just not micromanage it. You know,
First
just
that it comes
say,
from-
you know, is this possible to do? Yes, it is, and then they can work it out with council.
My first thought is that, you know, this is the problem y'all got into to begin with when my concern is that this is how you got into something like, you know, it's, you wanted 3230, make 3230 happen. And now we're in this situation. So I like the fact of knowing what you guys want to happen and have our input to say, this is how it can happen. You guys decide on the numbers of what needs to go on. And we can look at that and say, we can look at the rates and put the rates in across the board of where they have to be to make the numbers that you're looking to do. You know, that's what I'm saying. We got to know the processes, and so we just got to make sure it works with our staff to make sure the processes work that what you want to happen.
And let me just add, from the council's perspective, especially on this recommendation, they are looking for your input. I mean, this is probably the biggest single issue dollar-wise that you guys will grapple with, the council will have to look at. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know where, you know, all 7 members of council would come down. But I think it's going to depend on every question that you guys have asked, every piece of financial implication that it has, all the different scenarios that could be there. They're gonna listen intently to what you have to say. Granted, the final decision is with council. You know, that's what they're elected to do. But they're going to be looking for your recommendation. They're going to be looking for, you know, all of this and all the questions you have asked. If y'all don't ask them in this setting, then council's going to have to ask them in theirs. And so it's better to go ahead and get these questions asked and answered now and present, we think X should happen and here's why. Fully vetted. So.
Well, and you know, this is kind of a philosophy, but this is, you know, why you chose to do it this route. You know, we don't want to bring council a problem without bringing a solution. So we got to come up with, okay, this is what the number is. This is where we're at. This is what the implications are financially. It's got to be a full meal deal with a ribbon around it.
Gotcha. Mayor Cole, I know that I'm tying this in, but we have the February 20th early budget input session. Would it maybe be a good idea, since we're talking about trying to get everything tied around that time, if we have enough information to see, since that's an open, you know, council and people can talk, address each other, may some of us be in there, since this is going to be a budget impact item, and council may have questions and we can actually have some dialogue. We might actually be in a position where we have that idea.
And I guess the question would be, does the committee feel they would be ready to have some substantive, whether it's not a recommendation, but at least a narrower focus of where you're headed, so you can have some of those and even field questions from them. I mean, that is, it's the end of next week.
I think it all depends on what the information looks like.
Yep.
It's almost 2 weeks.
I'm about to have to jump off here. I'm sorry. But one thing, John, we're looking at those numbers. My main concern is that we forgive something and then next year we have a rate increase because of it. So that's one of my major concerns. I don't want a rate increase because of the decisions we've made.
Right.
Patrick, look, just while we got you, next Monday is what we're looking at for our next meeting, 4 p.m. Can you make it?
Let me look at my calendar.
While he's doing that, I'll run that. Jimmy, I think that's a good idea, but let me run that by staff on what their plate looks like. And it may be that we slate this committee for a certain amount of time for that. and then go from there.
Okay. Is the city open on President's Day?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Yes, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. All right, just for process check, we're at 5:30. We've I think expressed quite a few opinions and exchanged some good ideas, which are maybe leaning us towards some consensus on how to treat 3230. I want to make sure that we're hearing from everybody, though. Jennifer, generally, what are your thoughts around some of the comments you might interpret as consensus around dealing with 3230?
I think that we do have to get that dollar amount that everyone's been talking about. And then on the 3230, from reading the Rex Tillis report, it seemed like if you went with the 3230 plan, that was going to have complications with the AMI, which I thought that's what we were going forward with. So in my eyes, that would seem not wise to do. You would want to go with something that you could go long term and then not have to confuse the customer again with changing your rate or the structure. So I kind of like that we're going to hopefully get this calculation number that we need to see. And then we need to decide if we're going to do some kind of rate structure and have the customers pay off that amount, or if there's going to be a forgiven amount, what Mr. Day was talking about.
All right, thank you. Julie, I don't know exactly what time you joined in that conversation. I apologize. Any general thoughts to share?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And generally, listening to the conversation, I agree with a lot of what's being said. I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. I think the thought of forgiving any amount, with or without insurance, needs to be viewed or should be viewed, as a favor to the citizens. I know that I've seen chatter about other businesses when they encounter errors, eating those costs. However, I've also experienced the opposite of when businesses do encounter billing errors. I've personally encountered those being sent to collections without even being notified because of that error. So I think that the city, even up to this point, has done a great job in trying to be accommodating to the citizens. So I think that absolutely needs to be recognized and publicized. So those are kind of my thoughts. I think I wish that there was a way to identify the cost, identify the deficiencies, and almost set it aside and apart from a certain point in time moving forward with AMI, and really almost look at the two separately. From what I'm hearing, that doesn't seem to be an easy task with billing, but that's kind of my thought is let's look at the two almost separately. Start with AMI at a clean slate moving forward once we have a cost, and then figure out whatever billing situation each customer would encounter with the errors that did occur previously.
I think you said that really well.
Hey, Steve, if I can, I have one question for Mr. McCarter. At the next meeting, can you be kind of prepared to go over budget, how y'all come at budgeted revenue, and kind of how this accrual would actually affect, would tie into future rates and how they're tied to budget revenues and expenses? And also just confirm if all the expenses for providing the water is actually calculated monthly, so there's not an expense accrual as well that we pay down the road.
Yep, I can be ready with all that.
Thank you, sir.
Denise, in your role with process and note taking, I don't know that I really gathered from you if you're kind of on board with some of the consensus comments that seem to be popping up, or if you have a different take on things.
No, and I didn't share that I actually have some help. I asked Jennifer if she would be so kind. I did pretty miserable last week of doing action items, so Jennifer has assumed that responsibility. I'm so thankful for that. I'm like Jimmy. I used the water. I just want to know that I'm only going to get billed for the water that I used. I believe that I owe that to the city. This is my city. Having a fair approach where the customer's concern about being billed a large amount or not having time to pay on it, or, you know, John and Nancy understand that much more than what I do, but then we take that into consideration. If we can find a way, John, for you to clip some fun and save some money, right, and not have to bill it all out, I think that would be a very nice gesture to the city, because it's really been rather stressful. It shows goodwill, and I don't think complete forgiveness is in the best interest of the city. But I do think that finding some grace for the customers is, I'd like to be able to pass that on as a peace offering, so to say, to gain trust back again. Thank you for asking, Steve.
Certainly. Okay, with those, anybody else on the committee feel like they haven't had a chance to register their opinion kind of on 3230?
Hey, Steve, the only thing that I would say, I guess the main question mark that I have right now is that if we do the total forgiveness, if that will have an effect on the bond rating, and then therefore how much higher interest we're going to have to pay over time, because I think we need to factor that in if there is a change in the bond rating.
Yeah,
Mark,
for sure.
That's That's action item number 13, where Mr. O'Day had brought that up. He would like for the city to the staff to let us know what we would have to absorb as far as bond complications and stuff.
And Mr. McCarter, is there a good way to project what eating a few $1 million will do to future rates?
I mean, we have a rate model that we can use as a baseline. We would basically adjust, a one-time hit to revenue in 21 and see what that does in the out years. But Raftellus is the one that we contracted with years ago to do that rate model, so we can update it. And if we need to bring them on to help with that, we can. That's what we did at projections last year to do the FY20 projection, and it worked fairly well. But yes, we do have a mechanism to do that.
So make sure you add that to your action items.
Speaking of Raftellus, are we at a point where we could cut them loose and let them start?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I think we're going to bring this to a wrap, Denise, and really just discuss confirmation of next meeting time and any other agenda items, work process in between now and then. I had one more question to try to sum this up and a comment first. As I think about all the moving pieces to this here, all the different opinions and the processes that are involved here, I'm always in my mind trying to bring this down to relativity, to how important is this going to be to an individual user. Of the 38,000 users that there are, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about $100? Are we talking about $200? $15, whatever it is. So Nancy, my question to you is, have any residents asked the question for their individual account? What do I owe? What is the gap? And what did you send to them to answer that question? In other words, did you send them an explanation that says, hey, here's what I calculated, or has that not even come up yet?
It has come up, Mr. Sabo. What has come up is that we had 5 customers that wanted to know what their true up amount is. And I believe Mr. Davis can, because he was one of the customers, we provided them what their next 2 water bills would look like. And that would include the base cost in there as well. So that's what we did. That's what we did for them. We showed them in a spreadsheet exactly how much their next 2 water bills would be. And we had only 5 customers that asked for that information.
Would you mind sharing one of those? If you want to pull the names to protect the innocent, that would be great. But I would love to see the model of communication that went back out to them that kind of shows the calculation itself, or the data that was used that went into the calculation, and trying to get some relativity here for an individual user.
Yes, sir. I can redact out the personal information on one of the 5 people that we did this for, and I can I'll send that over to you and Ms. Hewitt, so that way you can take a look at it and then send it out to the committee at that point.
Hey, Nancy, if you would like to pull an updated, because a lot's changed since we had that, if you would like to pull an updated on mine and black it out, but just send them, just so we have an idea, and it's based on kind of what's outstanding today.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Okay, well,
Yes,
I'll be
ma'am.
happy to use yours. And I apologize for saying that yours was one of the 5, so I apologize. That's something on a personal nature. But I'll be happy to update yours, and I'll redact it out. I'll go ahead and put that out there and put that information for you, and redact your information out there and put that out for them.
Nancy, I think we could even do one better and maybe pull a few commercial accounts too, to give an idea. I think the 5 are all residential, and I don't know that any of them are some of the big users that some of the committee members have raised questions about. So let's talk tomorrow about what a good sample size is to give kind of an array of different types of customers that could inform an understanding too.
I like that idea. We could do a variety of customers, commercial, those that have irrigation systems and so forth, and go from there.
I think I know I would find that really useful, and give me a little bit of grounding in how I think about this. Given the timeline here, Denise, I'm going to suggest that we move to item 6 on the agenda, if no committee members object. As we think about in timeline here, the budget workshop, the 22nd meeting of council, by which we hope to have finished up our first set of recommendations and bringing to council the important next steps in terms of information that we might need, as referenced by Rep. Tellis on the call here, in order for them to actually move through a calculation with a set of assumptions. Might take them some extra time. Extra time means money. Council will have to review and approve that in order to facilitate and get us that information. Mayor Cole, you're the liaison here, so there may be some intermediary conversations that need to happen. But certainly our mindset ought to be by the agenda set on the 18th or 17th of this month. We ought to generally know what we're presenting to council in terms of what additional resources we might need. So we have one meeting between now and then. The proposed next meeting would be 4:00 on next Monday, the 15th. Can anyone not make that meeting? Hearing no conflicts, I would suggest that that'll be our next time period to talk. And are there any specific goals for that meeting that anyone on the committee has that we haven't necessarily talked about in our deliverables today?
Well, I recognize that you're not going to have any of the financials done by then, is my suspicion. So I think we need to focus on making and finishing all of the other recommendations and make recommendations with ribbons around it, literally, for all the other things that don't require numbers. So that's basically everything but 3230.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have some things to talk about at the meeting directly related to 3230. Obviously, you know, with the information that John is pulling together, I think we'll have a lot of good information to go back and forth with, and ideally we'll have a kind of an advanced copy of his report, so we might even have some questions about that. Personally, I think we should prioritize this conversation that we're having and make sure that we're ready for the council meeting on the 22nd. And then subsequent to that, I would suggest that we move to the next agenda items, which would be 3B. Sorry, we're shutting our office down, so I was getting notice that I'm the last one and have to lock up. Yeah, 3B is kind of next in line, Ralph, to our conversation stream.
And I'm just trying to get in a position that if we can have finished action items and recommend council at the next meeting, then we need to do it as much as we can.
Great. One quick request of staff, maybe to put on the action item list. I have yet to understand really what role Tyler Technologies plays as it pertains to New World and what their capacity or their capabilities are. So if, Nancy, maybe you're the best one. If you could maybe give us at the next meeting a 5-minute overview of who they are, what they do, you know, what they're capable of doing and what they might do for us down the road to kind of streamline our processes associated with New World, that would be helpful. Any other thoughts as we think about the agenda for next Monday?
Will do.
Thank you.
We were going to try to run the action items, but I think Jennifer has a pretty exhaustive list when she said that she was on item number 13. That list is.
I'm sorry, Nancy or Denise. I've got 16 action items total now for our list.
So I'd like to recommend this first time that the team members work independent. That list will be out on the SharePoint OneDrive folder. And so maybe you can each go out there and figure out which ones belong to you. It'll be identified as opposed to us running a list this evening. Is that agreeable?
Yeah, good idea.
Council Chairman Chabot, can you kind of clarify your what you're looking for when to contact New World and Tyler Technologies, and you know what is it that you're trying to ascertain from them?
Yeah, what I want to do, if they're already engaged, I would like to try to understand what they've done for us in the past, and generally what their what their elevator pitch is, what they think they're good at, and if there's any plans to engage them for other things in the future, what that is, just so I can understand their scope. And generally I've heard things like you guys haven't gotten a lot of support in the implementation and operation of New World, and I want to make sure that I'm connecting what Tyler's role in that is, if anything, and what else they might be able to do for you.
Thank you, sir.
Certainly.
And Nancy, if there's any additional insight that staff can give, Raf Tellis mentioned ongoing engaging with Tyler Technologies about ongoing issues, and whatever it is that y'all have to do your manual calculations, might be just good to understand what is the problem and how big of a problem is it.
And this is from the Raf Tillis report saying ongoing issues that we're having?
Yeah, they referenced about continuing to engage Tyler Technologies about the ongoing issues.
Inefficiencies and errors.
Yeah, limitations and errors, right.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yeah, we're just trying to find out what's involved and how do we get you help.
Thank you.
Really.
Yeah.
All right, if there are no other questions, I'm going to recommend we adjourn the meeting. I appreciate everybody's time. Again, I think we're making some progress here. This was a good discussion. I think getting us closer to kind of a tighter deliverable around 3230. So I appreciate everybody's effort.
Steve, I do have one last thing. Do we know yet when Mr. Upton's going to be available to update us on AMI status? Is it possible to get him for next Monday?
Great question, Jimmy. And I think I think a high-level project plan and timeline would be helpful in that context for AMI. So I don't know, John or Nancy, have you had a chance to check his availability?
He was not working from the office this week, so I'll have to check. I'll have to check on that. But what I would ask is, when I did talk to him, he did ask if you guys can supply him with questions that you do have, so he can address those in the time. And so the information and the conversation you're having is more of an untimely basis, because it can be detailed down into the drilling into the project, or speak on the high level of what that is. So if you can kind of give him some direction and if you want to supply those questions to John and myself, then we can put those together and have them sent off to him.
I think he just comes prepared to give us a good high level overview and answer whatever questions we can ask. I don't know if we're going to know enough to ask a deep dive, but at least an overview, right?
A high level with just here's what we're on pace for. I'll be ready.
Yeah, recognizing that I know nothing about it in terms of what he's doing and how it is. So, he needs to give a presentation that's just basically, here's what it is, here's what it's supposed to do, here's where we are, and here's where we're going. And here's what the schedule looks like.
Okay, so if I understand correctly from y'all,
I'm very ignorant. Okay.
Just a high level overview status of what the AMI project is.
Yeah, and please make sure he understands the challenge, and the number one issue is high consumption and what's going on with high consumption. And certainly AMI, if it functions correctly, should help us resolve some of those. But by the same token, it's also another data handoff that you're not currently doing. And how's that handled and what the potential pitfalls are. I'll go back, management of change discussion a little bit. How are you going to mitigate potential data transmission issues and data errors and et cetera? But that's a deep dive side. Right now, it's just like, no, what is it? How big an elephant is it? And does it have two trunks and a tail?
I'll give him the information on that you're looking for an overview on the 30,000 foot level of the project itself. And then if you're going later on, deep dive, that could be a later conversation. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, and timeline is an important aspect of that overview.
I will tell you guys that from my point of view, fully implementing AMI scares me for obvious reasons. And so asking these questions and knowing where we are and knowing, I think Ralph's dead on. We need to make sure what we're dealing with so we don't have additional unintended consequences moving forward. I think what you will find is the work product, the actual output of AMI per customer is going to be gold. I mean, it's going to be great stuff. Steve, you sent an email, I think last week during one of our meetings from your electric provider. And that is exactly the type of stuff you'll be able to do with AMI. And so individual customers can know in real time if there's, a parameter bust, in their water, so they would know then how to react to it. So I think all of that is great. but implementing yet another system within water billing while we're still, muddling through some of this stuff just scares me to death. If we need to put the brakes on for several months, I mean, we have the system we have the infrastructure in place. It's not like we're holding up and we have to go do it for a certain reason. But we want to make sure we're ready to roll right through that. So, but I appreciate you guys' time and effort today. Really do. Right.
All right. Appreciate everybody. Denise, I think we're ready to adjourn the meeting, assuming there's no clarifications.
Very good. Anybody have anything else to add? If not, we're going to call it at 8:57. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all.
Don't forget to check your homework.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.